Let's get into what happened then. So our top story, the chaos in the House of Commons last night. Fiery exchanges and walkouts following what was supposed to be a debate about a Gaza ceasefire.
Now, the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, is facing calls to resign today after he broke with convention and allowed both Labour and Tory amendments to the SNP's ceasefire motion. I know. A move that drew accusations of bias that caused Conservative and SNPs to leave the chamber in protest. Take a look at this.
The operation of Standing Order number 31, which governs the way amendments to the Opposition Day motions are dealt with, reflects an outdated approach. Order! You'll be going and not be voting. Well, that's the first one to leave, then. If you want to, do it.
33 MPs have now signed a motion of no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle, despite him returning to the chamber to make an unprecedented apology. Look at this.
And I have tried to do what I thought was the right thing for all sides of this House. I thought I was doing the right thing and the best thing, and I regret it and I apologise for how it's ended up. I do take responsibility for my actions, and that's why I want to meet. And that's why I want to meet with the key players who have been involved.
Very dramatic evening. We're joined in the studio by TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell, and the Telegraph's assistant US opinion editor, Poppy Coburn. Good morning to you both. Morning. Peter, if we just go back to the absolute basics on this, what happened? The SNP wanted to table a motion, and it was an attempt, really, to split the Labour vote.
Yes.
And to kind of political gameplay over how and what words they were going to use to call for a ceasefire. Labour then say, right, we don't want to get involved in that, we'll table our own amendment. So too do the Conservatives. Then the Speaker has the decision to be able to say, which one are we going to vote on? And there he broke with precedent, and then we saw the scenes yesterday.
But what is
Explain
the precedent?
What
did he, in simple terms?
Well, usually, when you have an opposition day debate, as you did yesterday, the opposition motion would just be put to the House. That's usually what happens.
And that would have been the SNP's.
The SNP's one. So if an opposition party, Labour, puts an amendment to that, usually it doesn't get accepted because it's an opposition day motion. Now, what the SNP were trying to do was what they did a few months ago, basically saying Labour split on this. 56 MPs from Labour a few months ago voted for the SNP motion against their own party. Now we're in a situation where they want to split Labour again. They want to go to their voters and say, look, Labour voted against a ceasefire in Gaza. But Labour puts its own motion forward. That usually wouldn't be accepted. Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, then accepts it.
Who is a Labour supporter?
Well,
MP?
No, he's not, because he's an independent.
He
but
was
he was a Labour MP for 20 years. He's meant to act completely impartially. Some people saying he didn't, but he's saying that actually MPs are under such incredible pressure over this issue at the moment that he wanted to break precedent, go against the advice of his clerks, his officials, who know this back to front, and say, give everybody a chance to vote.
Now what's really interesting, Poppy, if I can read this from The Sun, because for me, my view would be, and we've been talking about this for hours this morning, this is just another example about how your average man and woman in the streets of England this morning are going to go, what an absolute joke our politicians are. I said yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu, he doesn't give a damn about what they say. I understand we're supposed to be this big power. The Sun says, what matters is our democracy. And whether Hoyle would have done this to the Tories, for the Tories, at the same time as he seems to have done for Labour in terms of impartiality, what pressure was brought to bear on Lindsay Hoyle by the Labour hierarchy, and it matters gravely. The changed parliamentary convention ultimately, this is the Sun today, to appease a baying pro-Hamas mob massed outside Parliament. Your thoughts, Poppy?
Well, that really does get to the crux of the issue. I mean, let's be frank, this is an entirely symbolic vote. You know, this is not actually going to stop any of the fighting going on in Gaza at the moment. This is a clear case of political opportunism. What I found very interesting is Maria Caulfield, who's the Conservative MP...
who's on this show later.
Had tweeted yesterday afternoon about seeing Sue Gray walking around the corridors and having a conversation with the Speaker. Now, it does seem that...
He denies, by the way, that they had any conversation. Which has been denied.
And of course it has been denied. And of course the Speaker, you know, he is an impartial man. But it does seem to be... Maybe there's an assumption that Keir Starmer is a Prime Minister in waiting. He's using a bit of pressure to twist the Speaker's arm to get this amendment through. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. But let's be frank.
It staved off the Labour rebellion. It favoured Labour, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
And the clear point that was made here by Lindsay Hoyle when he was explaining why he made the decision he did, he said he was worried about MP intimidation. Now, that is really the crux of the issue here. Our MPs feel that they are being intimidated by members of the public. There was a massive protest outside of the House of Commons last night. People braying in the streets, shouting about which way the MP should vote on this issue. And again, this is a symbolic vote, and people feel too afraid to say what they actually believe on this issue.
Well, you're absolutely right, Poppy, and that should never, ever be the issue. That should never be a factor in any of this. MPs should vote on what they're meant to vote on, not what a mob outside say they should vote on.
It wasn't necessarily the mob outside. It might have been the fear that MPs would get retribution on social media.
Well, that's part of it too, but that should never be part of it. They should vote for what they're principled and what they're meant to do, Rosie.
So Lindsay Hoyle decided to go against principle and create new precedent. Explain to us why he did that, because safety is definitely one of the things that he brought up. And if that was the case, why did it spark such a furious reaction? So in simple terms, if this was a motion saying there should be a ceasefire in Gaza, the SNP were all going to vote for it, other people were going to vote against it. The SNP in Scotland could then say Labour have voted against a ceasefire in Gaza. What Lindsay Hoyle says he wanted to do, and to be honest, I think I believe him actually, is to say there are different motions. Labour want one thing, the Conservatives want another thing, slightly different wording, but essentially everybody can vote for wanting a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, Labour split on this issue. There would be people who would vote for a ceasefire, there would be people who would vote against it. If they had their own motion, everybody could vote for it. It's definitely a real boon for Keir Starmer. It made Keir Starmer's life easier, no doubt about that. But it annoyed everybody else, including the SNP, including their leader in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, who says that Sir Lindsay Hoyle's position as Speaker is probably less tenable this morning.
Let me throw you something that I read overnight. I was telling Rosie about this morning. John Bercow, who used his position to try and cancel Brexit, he and his Remainer friends, was thrown out as Speaker of the House of Commons after 23, only 23, check this morning, people voted no confidence in him. 33 in Hoyle. I agree with you. I think Sir Lindsay Hoyle is a decent man. I think he's a parliamentarian. I am flabbergasted that he went against his clerk's advice. And there is absolutely no way, Peter, whether you sit there and say he's a nice man, that this looks anything other to other people than a stitch-up to get the would-be Prime Minister in waiting off the hook. That is how it looks. And we can talk about retribution, we can talk about, social media and the Hamas or Palestinian groups outside and people will wave it. Nobody knows who was there. The Sun called them pro-Hamas. I don't know. Right? But the fact of the matter is, it is a massive own goal by a speaker.
Yes.
Sue Gray was in that corridor, allegedly. Others are saying...
Keir Starmer, Chief of Staff, we should say.
Yeah, and this is the Sue Gray. Can we have this out with people? This is the Sue Gray who ran the report into Boris Johnson and then became the Chief of Staff of Keir Starmer.
Just to be really clear, the Speaker said that he had not met with Sue Gray. So it's actually a battle of...
Well, we've got Maria Colford on who says that she saw it and she's on the show later.
Well, we can ask her later if she believes
just
the
with
Speaker
this in mind, I'm actually texted in at 7222 whether we're talking about, and Peter in London says, yes, our political system is broken. So maybe you can read that out later on.
Peter in London, yes, this is from Peter in London, 8722. Peter the nerd says, yes, our political system is broken. So thank you for that.
Can I just remind people of one fact? In Gaza yesterday, the Hamas Health Ministry, now these are their figures, we have to be sceptical about them, but they tell us 107 people died yesterday in Gaza. Many of them innocent civilians. Every single thing that happened in Parliament yesterday has had no effect, and it doesn't amount to a hill of beans in terms of what happens in Gaza.
And doesn't it make us look, our parliamentary system, which is why we threw that out, does it not make us look pathetic? I was called cynical for going, I said to Quentin Letts, why do they bother? Benjamin Netanyahu, he said, no, it's important. We look like we're laughing stock this morning. Do you not agree?
It was an absolute spectacle. It's an absolute spectacle.
People are saying, there should be a vote of no confidence in the Speaker. Peter, I know this is kind of slightly technical, but that mechanism doesn't actually exist,
That's right. That's right. I mean, we've got a motion, what's called an early day motion. I mean, a lot of this is parliamentary procedure.
It's basically people saying, I'm unhappy with the Speaker.
And that's it. And only 33 have done that so far out of 650 MPs. That number will undoubtedly rise today. Will the Speaker survive the day? I think he probably will. I think there's quite a lot of sympathy for him, although the SNP clearly are very, very knocked. But my instinct is Lindsay Hoyle will survive. But let's just see what happens over the next day or two.
Because Penny Mordaunt from the Conservatives seemed to accept his apology.
Leader of the House of Commons, yeah, and I think that's crucial.
Can we talk about the one thing we haven't talked about, team, please, which is, let's look at the other side of the coin, which we always try and do. Labour can be accused of getting off the hook. The Tories and the SNP, which is my thing as well, walked out in a huff.
Yeah.
Right? How the hell does that look to the great British public? Walking out like school children because they didn't like what was happening.
Well, I think also...
And Gaza's on. You know what I mean? That's ludicrous.
I think also what was interesting is William Ragg, who's deputy chairman of the 1922 committee, actually tabled a private vote, which, if it had passed, would have meant all of the press and all hands on being moved out of the gallery. This hasn't happened since 2001. It was over debate on a terrorism bill. I mean, this is utterly shocking that we very nearly got to a situation where all of the press were actually removed from the chamber. And there would have been no reporting on it.
And people couldn't have seen it on TV either.
Exactly,
yeah.
because I think there was some understanding that this had become such a spectacle, and spectacle is really the only word I can think of. This is impotent. It's totally impotent. As you've just said, Peter, it will have no influence whatsoever on what's going on in Gaza.
If I was an MP, I would be interested into what the British public who voted me in would think. We've said all morning, is our political system broken? Talk today at talk.tv. Dave got in touch. These MPs don't serve us, they only think about themselves, which is clearly evident in yesterday's mass chaos in the House of Commons.
Barry, good morning, has said Lindsay Hoyle tried appeasing Labour and he must now go. Well, Lindsay Hoyle said, sorry, I mean, we showed you the clip earlier. He came back and he said, I do take responsibility for my actions and that's why I want to meet with the key players who've been involved. We'll see how that plays out today.
He was near to tears, wasn't he?
Yes, he was really, it was extraordinary. I've been a political nerd for about 30 years. I've followed Parliament very closely for 15 years. I've never seen anything like Lindsay Hoyle's apology last night.
You told me yesterday that I was... No, you didn't. Quentin Letts told me I was cynical to say that it didn't matter.
Just because you're cynical doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong.
I will tell you categorically he will be gone by the end of the week.
OK.
I genuinely believe I think he's a decent man. I think he's crossed the line. And I think that's the problem. And I think it'd be interesting to have Maria Colford on later, though, the government minister who tweeted, won't it?
The point is, as well, when you're Speaker, you've got to be in control. You've got to be respected.
He wasn't yesterday.
People have got to listen to you. They weren't listening yesterday. They weren't doing what they were told. He was saying order. They were laughing. They were jeering. And when you're not in control, you can't have any authority as Speaker anymore.
I feel like that every morning.
And getting that back is very difficult once it's lost. You know?
He said, I thought I was doing the right thing and the best thing. I regret it and I apologise for how it's ended up. You know, if that was enough to convince Penny Mordaunt and some of the Conservatives who were pretty angry and all left the chamber, we'll see how it develops.
And in fairness, we always criticise politicians for never apologising. He has apologised.
And absolutely sincerely.
I'm going to throw something in here. I would suspect that the Tory party would like him out so that they can get a Tory MP in as Speaker in the next Commons and when Labour allegedly win. There's a thought for you.
Well, the senior, the sort of number 2 Speaker is Dame Eleanor Lang.
Yep. And
she is someone who certainly the Conservatives would be happy with as Speaker, and lots of other people across the House, so we'll see what happens.
The other story yesterday, it's just like pennies from heaven for us. Tucker Carlson, ex-Fox in America, now does all of these interviews, not on a par with Piers Morgan, uncensored, by the way, just making that point. Went, of course, and interviewed Vladimir Putin. It wasn't an interview, it was just a how are you and the rest. Anyway, there's a big spat about him and Boris Johnson. Do you want to tell this story? This is utterly fantastic.
I'll let Poppy do the honours.
She's brilliant, this story.
She knows the US stuff.
This is very, very funny. Now, Tucker Carlson has gone on quite a political journey. It's quite something to go from, you know, interviewing kind of the news stories of the day to going to interviewing autocrats. And he actually extended his hand to Boris Johnson, and this is after Boris Johnson had written a column saying that he felt that Tucker Carlson was a disgrace to journalism for going over to Russia and interviewing Vladimir Putin. Yeah. As you've said, it wasn't really an interview.
No,
it was more of a rambling, hour-long session where Putin tried...
2 hours.
2 hour-long session.
Did he speak at all in that?
We got a half-hour lesson, didn't we?
Well, it was when he brought the folder out,
of
it was a
Ukrainian
history lesson, and you can see Tucker kind of sitting there, his very characteristic trademark gormless, like that. It was really fascinating. So anyway, Boris Johnson says this is disgrace to journalism. He's come over here. He's essentially doing propaganda for Russia, which is currently carrying out, a murderous war in Ukraine. And he has said that this was disgraceful in his column. And Tucker said, well, I'm not happy about this. Why don't you come on and we can have a discussion about what you think about the Ukraine war? Now, Boris Johnson allegedly demanded that he wanted to be paid $1 million for this interview. He said that $1 million would go to a charity for Ukrainian veterans. Tucker Carlson took umbrage with this. He said, Putin, you can say what you like about him, but you didn't ask me for any money. So these negotiations all fell apart after the murder of Alexei Navalny in Russia, which is obviously, let's be honest, was ordered by the Vladimir Putin regime. Boris Johnson then pulls out, probably thinks this is not a good look, I can't be dealing with these sorts of propagandists anymore. Tucker Carlson publicises everything. It's all blown up. There are lots of very funny videos on social media of Boris Johnson looking very confused and quite angry, kind of rowing about Tucker Carlson.
Boris Johnson has made the point that he always meant for that $1 million to go to charity, and I firmly believe him, don't you, Peter Carlson?
Yes, and I would have no reason to disbelieve him. I mean, Boris Johnson always tells the truth.
So would you believe Tucker Carlson or Boris Johnson?
It's a bit like, do you remember the libel trial between Neil Hamilton and Mohammed Al-Fayed? It's like you sort of want them both to lose.
Peter, thank you so much. Poppy, really appreciate your time, and particularly when we've got that big US story rumbling on, really appreciate it.